In this video, I'd like to look at uh, having React make a grid-like structure. So have some divs that sort of have multiple columns or multiple rows, and so on like that. So have some grid styling to them and being added dynamically by React, of course. Okay, so the code in this example can be found at the URL seen here in this comment. And here's what it looks like running. So I have a JSON file with data on some art anatomy books from Dover Publications, and then the user can uh, examine various books, how many pages, what's their price, what have you, and then also sort of add them to a cart. And then if you try to add something you already have, the human machine, if I try to add that one again, it's going to tell me I already have that book. I have a conflict or something. Okay, so that's what the page does. Let's have a look. So here's the HTML. While that's open, I have a title, I have links to the CDNs, and I have a link to the style sheet, which we'll show in a minute. On the page in the body, I have a header. I have a div with an ID and a class. The class is wrapper. That's going to be the overall container for the grid. And so that wrapper will get some styling, some grid styling. And then there is a script that is connecting to the React code, the JavaScript and React code, and it is of the Babel type. So I'll be doing some the Babel version of React. Okay. So that is the HTML. Let's look at the CSS. Some body, centered it, colored the page. Here is the wrapper. That's the div that exists on the page. And here's its display, its grid. It's got 3 columns. The last one's wider than the other 2. So that makes, we can see that. Okay, and then box. So the overall box that you see behind is black. That's the wrapper. And then more up front, these squares, those are of the box class. So as I'm making divs, I will be adding the box class to them, and then I will add any additional styling as needed to, say, span 2 columns or to span several rows, as the case may be. Okay, so we showed the HTML, we showed the CSS. Let's look at the JSON, and then we'll finally get our hands dirty and do the actual React. So here is the data file. I kind of flop back and forth. And this data file is starts with an array. And it's an array of objects. And then those objects are property like book title, book author, book ISBN, book page number, book cover, book price. Okay. And then we're finally ready. The only thing we haven't talked about so far is the JS. Okay. So there's going to be a class which extends the React component, and that's going to take some talking about. And then that's all for naught if you don't sort of put it on the page. So we're using the React DOM and creating a root for that. I had that one div on the page, div book display, using a query selector to grab it. This could also be document get element by ID, div book display. This pound or hashtag is a sort of CSS way of working by ID. And then once you have the container, then put an object of your React component class into that container. Okay. So now here's the class. Start with a capital letter, extend React component. We want to have a state there are going to be an array of books that I'm going to get from the JSON file, but at the time of the constructor, at the time of the constructing, I have not yet read the file, and so it is an empty array. I'm going to have books that the user chose in their cart. That's also going to be an array. I'm going to be examining a particular book. So I'm looking right now at a particular book. So that's going to be determined by book index. Then I'm going to have all the books. Then I'm going to have the array of user books. And is loading, it determines, have I read my JSON resource or not? And then the total is how much money the person's going to owe if they decide to, buy all the books in the cart. Okay, make a little bit more space here. Okay, get me out of the way. All right, so that was the state that we added to the constructor of our extended React component class. There are two main actions of a user: changing the book in the dropdown and adding something to the cart. So those are going to be my two methods you're going to see here. Handle change. In all, handle change does, although various things happen, the picture will update, all this data will update. That is not explicitly coded here. That will get handled below. That the page will depend on the state. So if I change the state, the page will get re-rendered. So I don't have to talk about what happens to the page. All I have to do is say that the book index, the book that the user chose, is changing. And so the E is the event that brought me here. The target is the particular thing, the drop-down list. The drop-down list has a value. And then I'm using that value to set the book index in my state. Okay. Oops, pardon. Then here is add to the cart. And again, so this time it was a button. And I'm getting the total so far. Our usual way of working here is to not change the state directly, but to sometimes make a copy of the state, work with a copy of what's in the state, and then sort of reestablish the state at the end. So because there's some synchronicity issues, so you can't just sort of change the state and then presume that you can work with that, then change state. So you make a copy of it, then that copy you can sort of more own and know that it has indeed been updated. Okay, so I'm getting the total from the state using a parse float just to make sure it's understood as a number. So when I add something to it, it adds and doesn't concatenate or anything. And I'm getting a copy of the user's books. So, and that's going to be a set of indices, and I'm getting a copy of it. And then I am looking in my set of books, or the copy of my set of books. I'm looking for the book index. And so they have chosen a book. This is the add button, but they have previously chosen a book using the dropdown, and that's given by book index. So if I find the book index in my array of indices, then if I find it, it will tell me the index. If I don't find it, it'll give me an index of -1. So if I get a -1, that means that index is not already in my list, and I'm going to add it to my list by pushing it onto my copy. Then I am incrementing my total. So I'm using that book index, the book that the person's looking at, and going to my book array at that book index, and then grabbing that particular book's book price, adding it to my user total. The else is if it wasn't -1, that means I already had that book. I'm just going to pop up an alert. And then I'm going to, before I leave this method, reestablish the changed components of my state. So the total changed, or might have changed, and the array of books might have changed. So I reestablished those in my set state. Guess I could have put the set state here in the if, because if I have this else, I don't have to set the state. Here we are in the component did mount, which is where I read my JSON file. So I'm using a fetch. I'm fetching artanatomy.json that was next to the HTML. So they are siblings in the folder, so I can just refer to it by its file name. Then when I get that resource, I'm sending on the JSON. So JSON is a particular form, a very well understood form by JavaScript. So it can just send on this response, can just send on the JSON portion. And then I want to use that data to set the state. We looked at the JSON, and the JSON was an array. And books in my state was also an array. So books can be sort of set equal to the data. That depends on the form of your state and also the form of your JSON. In this case, they happen to be sort of both arrays, so that makes sense to do that. And then my isLoading property I set to false because now I am done with the resource, so I am done loading. So isLoading is now false. Okay, now I'm going to render. I render differently. If I am loading, if I haven't read the resource, then I just return a little paragraph tag saying loading. It usually happens pretty quickly and you don't see this. But if I had the wrong data file here, if I just set a 2, so now it won't find that data file, so it'll get hung up and it will stay loading. And then you see it doesn't load. Okay, let me go back to here. My styling wasn't so hot, so you didn't get to see the word loading because of, I think, poor styling choices, but it was indeed there. Now, when it gets to resource, you don't see the word loading because it's so split second. Okay. So that was this part of the render. Otherwise, we're rendering what you see here, and we're going to, again, this one is about some of this grid styling. Okay, so I'm going to put this all in a div of the wrapper class. So, and then all of the divs within the div of the wrapper class, which is a grid, I'm going to put in this box class. So here's my first div, and I'm going to give it an additional style. So I make it, wrong browser. I'm going to, this first div needs an additional styling so that it will span 2 columns. So I'm going to show sort of 2 ways to deal with the style. I can, up here at the top of render, I can sort of define styles. So I've defined 2 styles. I'm going to have altogether 3 styles. I have 3 cells, this one and this one with the picture of the book, and then this one down here for the cart. Those are the 3 special ones that have, beyond just being in the class box, have additional styling. And I'm going to do the first and the last one by defining a constant that corresponds to a style. And this is starting in grid in column 1 and spanning 2 columns and being in the first row. I think I can get away without that, frankly. And then the way you add that style in is, here's my div. I give it the class name box. I can't say class because I'm strictly speaking in React, JavaScript, and the name class has a JavaScript meaning. So we say class name box, and that's the HTML class that's related to the CSS styling. And then here's some additional styling, and I just say style is curly bracket, style A, which was defined above. And then I'm making a select, which relates to the handle change. I have my array of books. These are all the books, and I'm using map as a loop. I'm creating options. If I have multiples in React, it wants this key. The value is the index, And between the open option and close option is the book's book title. So that's what you saw in the dropdown. Titles of books. And that was the first cell. Okay, so gave it the box name and then gave it its additional styling to span 2 rows. The next div is the div for the image. And it has some styling, and I'm going to do that styling sort of more in line. Well, they're both in line, but I'm going to actually write the style here rather than above. So here's the div, the second div, class name box, and here's my style. And it is curly curly. So that's takes a little getting used to the first time, but curly curly, and then it's in column 3 and it's in the grid row 1 and spanning 5 rows. But again, this video is mostly about style. It's about a lot of things, but style is the sort of newest thing that's not in any other of my videos. And so here's the style with the double curly. Or if you predefined a style, like style A, then you can use that variable here with just 1 curly. Pardon. Okay, so that here was box 1. Here was box 2. Box 3 just says ISBN. Box 4 gives the ISBN, so it's this.state.books, square bracket, this.state.book index, close square bracket, .book ISBN. And then author, and the same thing with book underscore author, page number, price. So those are all relatively boring. Then here is the a button for a box with the button. So we're down here. And then a box that just says the word total and a box to display the total. I've added a $sign. I've added the 2 fix, so it gives me 2 nice decimal places for American money. Here's my last div, and I'm going back to that way with the predefined style at the top. So I defined a style up here in render style underscore C, I called it, and it was spans 3 columns. I'm in 1, and I span 3 columns, and then I gave it a different. I'm overruling the box color, which is orange, and making this one white. So here we are on the last box. Here's me giving it the style. It makes it span 3 columns. And then I am going to add books to my cart. And so this is a loop over the user's books, and user's book is really an array of indices, but it's an array, so I can map over it. And then the items that I'm in the array are book indices, and then there's just some counter I. I'm making multiple divs, so anything in React that has multiples that wants a key. I'm putting in a bold tag the title of the book, this.state.books, square bracket, user underscore book underscore index. Remember that this item of the array I'm looping over is an index. So I'm using the element as an index because that's what it is, an index. And then the books with that index, it's book title, end of square bracket, a non-breaking space. In italics, I'm putting the ISBN. And then after that, I'm putting with the $sign, I'm putting the book price. So that's what's appearing on each line in my cart. And I've got it in a div, so each one of these is sort of going to be on its own line vertically because each one's in a div. So that gives me my sort of line break or what have you. And here I am at the end of the div for that last box. Then I had put them all in a React fragment, and then I'm at the bottom. So that is all I am rendering. And there it is. Okay. So again, I had the original box in the HTML was a div of the wrapper class. In the CSS. The wrapper class dot, so it's a dot, so I'm styling a class, was of a grid. And here I specified that it had 3 columns. And then in the JavaScript, in the render, I am adding divs. I'm giving them the box class, which is the orange of little boxes within the wrapper. So the wrapper makes them into a grid, and so these are the components of the grid. And then I can add additional styling to span columns or rows. And if I predefine the style above, I can use just a single set of curly brackets with that sort of style variable name, if you will. And or I could alternatively make a div with a style and use a double curly bracket and then put the desired style. So this was the I'm in column 3 and spanning 5 rows, so this was for the image. So that's what I wanted to show you in this example. Thanks for your